Soon, the 21st of December 2012 will be upon us, and as before, many people are asking what this Mayan calendar thing is all about. While only a few really seem to think the end of the world is at hand, is there really something coming that the Maya predicted over 1,000 years ago? We've probably all seen the film 2012. Are we in for a bumpy ride, or is the 21st just going to be another day? Does the Mayan calendar really tell us that the world is about to change? Is it really the end of life as we know it? To come straight to the point of this video and answer the question I've just posed, from what I can see and from a pretty good look at both sides of the argument, the simple answer is no. This video will look at the historical and archaeological background of the debate. Many people don't really know anything about the Maya, who they were, where and when they lived, what happened to them, how their civilization was rediscovered after lying literally in ruins for centuries. It will look at the enigma, the mysteries of the Maya and their fabulous lost cities, their mysterious writing, their lost arcane knowledge, and the calendar that has caused so much recent controversy. In the second video, we'll look at whether the Maya really did predict disaster for this year, at the solstice on the 21st. We'll look at the confusion between the Aztec and Maya accounts, the world history of predictions of doom, who's who in the Mayan calendar stakes, and how some have suggested it's all going to end on the 21st. Then we'll see what the experts, both scientists and historians, have said, but also on the other side, Nostradamus, who keeps getting dragged into this, and modern-day astrologers. And not to forget the actual Maya of today. So let's start this video double with the historical background to the civilizations of Mesoamerica, and in particular the Maya. Please sit back and enjoy video 1. First, let's clear up some terms. You'll have noticed that I will be using the word Maya rather than Mayan in most cases. Maya is in fact the correct adjective to use with anything that describes the people, places and cultures of this ethnic group. Mayan is the language those people spoke and still speak today, and so, strictly speaking, we should only use this word when we're talking about language issues. However, recent popular usage has given the phrase Mayan calendar and other such terms widespread recognition, so of necessity we tend now to be not so strict about this. But for the most part I'll be using the word Maya. And I'll be talking about Mayanists, who are the people who study the Maya. So, who were the Maya? They were one of many civilizations which have developed in Mesoamerica, or Central America, over the last 4,000 or so years. Some signs of organized settlement go back to the time of pyramid building in Egypt, in other words 4,500 years ago. But the first distinct civilization were the Olmec, beginning about 1500 BC. They lived largely along the Gulf Coast, which you can see in the mustard colour. The next major cab off the rank were the Maya, from about 200 BC, and they lived in the areas shaded pink. For many years it was thought that the northern areas on the Yucatan Peninsula were only settled very late, say about 800 AD or thereafter, following troubles in the central Maya region in the middle of the shaded area, which was widely accepted as their point of origin. However, there have been many recent discoveries that have proven that the northern areas have been settled with an advanced Maya civilization for as long as the south. But around 900 AD, at the height of their power, the Maya seem to have simply abandoned most of their cities and left them for the jungle to reclaim. We're not sure why, but most experts think it was massive drought and climate change. Some of the northern cities, such as the Great Chichen Itza, were still to reach their zenith, but by about 1200 AD it was all over, and the great Maya city-states were just a folk memory. The last great areas for civilization were in the central part of Mexico, known as the Valley of Mexico. Teotihuacan was the first, but abandoned and burned after an apparent civil war or upheaval in the 8th century. The Toltecs, who may have been part of the cause, then took over, and the last group to move in were the Aztecs, starting about 1300 AD. Their legends have them wandering around for years looking for a homeland, rather like the Israelites. And then suddenly one day, in the lake, they saw an eagle on a cactus with a snake in its talons. This was a sign from their god, Huitzilopoctli, that this was the place to settle. The Aztec city of Tenochtitlan was then built on an artificial island in the middle of the lake, Lake Texcoco. The Aztec Empire was founded in 1427, and it quickly extended. It seemed magnificent and unassailable, but it was to last less than 100 years, because Mesoamerica was about to get a series of unexpected visits from across the Atlantic. In 1492, as we all know from a childhood rhyme, a man named Columbus sailed the ocean blue. He thought he'd found a new route to China, but on his first voyage didn't realise he'd discovered the West Indies. But the Spanish King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, who financed his expedition, saw the immediate potential. They immediately rewarded him by making him governor of the Indies, and quickly sent him back. This time with not 3, but 17 ships. In 1498 he was back again, and this time actually reached the South American mainland. But he had made enemies, and in the course of this voyage they had him arrested and sent back to Spain in chains. However, in no time the king had set him free and sent him back a 4th time, and this time he actually landed on the coast of Honduras, Nicaragua and Panama. He founded a garrison here, but found himself and his troops stranded without ships and food. You've probably seen the cliché in many movies of an explorer fooling natives by predicting an eclipse. Columbus actually did this, and this is probably the original story, and fooled the locals into feeding his starving men. Columbus's legacy was, of course, to discover the New World and claim it for Spain. And it did change Europe. It opened up the Americas for exploitation, and this was a lifesaver for an almost bankrupt Spain, which had only just finally kicked the Islamic Moors out of Spain the same year Columbus had originally sailed. It brought in untold wealth to the royal treasury and gave tens of thousands of unemployed soldiers, perhaps even hundreds of thousands, something new to do without causing trouble in their own country. And for a country obsessed with Catholicism, it gave the priests and friars new souls to convert to Christianity. The age of the conquistadors began, and the first was the most famous or infamous. Hernán Cortés would become a marquis through it, but he would not be remembered in Mexico with any fondness. His first landfall in February 1519 was in Maya territory on the Yucatan Peninsula. Very quickly he won a battle against the locals where Tabasco now stands. After this he converted 20 native women to Christianity, among them Marina, who would become his mistress, his ally, and his interpreter. She was nicknamed La Malinche, which was not complimentary. It means the traitor, but modern feminist historians have rehabilitated her, saying she was only making the best of her situation, which, when you think of it, is probably true. However, she was to prove decisive for Cortes. In July 1519, Cortes landed at Veracruz and prepared to march inland to the fabled city he'd heard of. He burned his ships to show his men there was no turning back, but also because he just had to put down a mutiny. On the way through to Tenochtitlan, he fought a battle at Cholula, the second largest Aztec city, where he massacred thousands of Aztecs. On the 8th of November 1519, he emerged from the mountain pass, and an awe-inspiring sight lay before him. The vast city of Tenochtitlan lay in the middle of the lake, connected to the banks by 4 causeways. It was of a size the Europeans had never seen. In Europe at this time, only Constantinople was bigger. Even from a distance, they could see monumental buildings in the centre, and as they moved through the city, they were amazed by the sophisticated buildings they saw. They were received graciously by the Emperor Montezuma, and over the next days, he lavished gifts of gold upon them. Cortes repaid this within a week by taking Montezuma hostage, but Montezuma seemed fascinated by Cortes, and for 5 months he forbade any action against the Spanish. However, in April 1520, news came to Cortes that an army had landed on the coast with the intention of arresting him. He decided to take some of his forces back to the coast to confront the Spanish expedition sent against him, but made the mistake of leaving one of his lieutenants, Pedro de Alvarado, in charge. Cortes left for the coast, and with characteristic daring, he quickly defeated the invaders and won them over to his cause, and then returned to Tenochtitlan. He found the city instead in uproar. Alvarado had misinterpreted a major festival and panicked, massacring hundreds of unarmed Aztecs, and now the city was in open revolt. Cortes tried to use Montezuma to appeal to the Aztecs, but the mob stoned him, and he died from his wounds. There was finally no alternative but to withdraw from the city. But the Aztecs had ripped up the drawbridges at all the causeways. Cortes had his men make a prefabricated bridge, and in a daring night escape on July 1, they managed to reach the shore, but lost nearly all of their collected treasure and many men. They retreated to the coast, where they were reinforced, and in December 1520, Cortes set out once again to besiege Tenochtitlan. He brought with him 11 prefabricated gunboats and attacked along 3 of the 4 causeways. In this picture, which was a reasonably contemporary source, we see Cortes in the lower right-hand corner and a force led by Alvarado coming from the top right along another causeway, and some of the ships in the left foreground. It took 8 months for the city to fall. With it fell the Aztec Empire. Why did Montezuma not act against Cortes immediately? He seemed to have a fascination for him. There is an idea that Montezuma thought he was the reincarnation of the god Quetzalcoatl, whose return was predicted in Aztec mythology. Interestingly, the Spanish arrived at exactly the time this was predicted. At least, that's what we have from Spanish accounts, which are now largely discredited as propaganda by historians. There is, in fact, no mention of this in local accounts. There was always bound to be conflict over religion. The Aztecs certainly didn't expect the Spanish Inquisition, if you'll pardon the Monty Python joke, but the history of militant Catholicism and the persecution of heretics by the exceptionally zealous Spanish Inquisition was always going to make them intolerant of the Aztec religion. The tradition of human sacrifice didn't help. Apparently it shocked even the battle and Inquisition-hardened Spaniards. But outrage was also very easy to feel when there were gold and jewels at stake. Cortés made an example of Tenochtitlan, completely erasing this incredible city from existence. Mexico City was built right over the ruins, and the surviving Aztecs were forbidden to live there. 60 years of war followed before central Mexico was subdued. The conquest of the Mayan Yucatan lands took 170 years, but the Spanish weren't quite as interested in that region as there was not so much obvious wealth there. Traditional religion was suppressed, and smallpox killed up to 90% of the population in some areas. Mesoamerican cities were abandoned and left to rot and return to the jungle, forgotten by all but a few. One of the first Franciscans to arrive in Yucatan was an especially zealous friar called Diego de Landa. In 1562, he discovered that the Maya were still preserving relics of their old religion, which he denounced as containing nothing but superstitions and falsehoods of the devil. He organised an auto de fe to root them out. His particularly violent and cruel campaign put many in jail and drove others to seek refuge in the forests. More importantly, for the historical and cultural heritage of the Maya, he went on an orgy of destruction, which almost completely destroyed all the cultural and scientific legacy of the Maya. De Landa's methods were considered extreme even by his contemporaries, and his bishops sent him home to Spain in disgrace to face charges. The Board of Inquiry exonerated him, and when De Landa's bishop died soon after, they actually appointed him as the new bishop in his place. De Landa determined to learn as much about Mayan culture as he could, so he could understand what he wanted to destroy. His researches, including an alphabet of the sounds of the Maya language and writing, were put together in his journal Relación de las Cosas de Yucatán. It contained many mistakes, but it was later to prove invaluable. But the cities, the writing, and the civilizations were lost, and it was the travel tradition of the European Romantic movement, such as those of Lord Byron, which would lead to a gradual rediscovery. The first Romantic traveller was a Prussian noble in 1803. A young Alexander von Humboldt later became a noted academic, and his brother would found the Berlin Humboldt University. Humboldt's publications about his Maya travels encouraged others. Among them, adventurer Juan Galindo, who explored Mayan ruins in 1834. Both Humboldt and Galindo marvelled at these mysterious ruins. Who had built them? The pyramids suggested ancient Egyptians. Galindo's suggestion that it may have been the ancestors of the locals was considered folly. It was American explorer, writer and spy John Lloyd Stephens who was to prove the catalyst for a new fascination with these mysterious ruins. Together with English architect Frederick Catherwood, he visited numerous Maya sites in 1839 and 40. Stephens wrote a bestseller travel book which Catherwood illustrated, beginning a Maya craze. His folios are a valuable record of how the cities looked back then. Chichen Itza, Uxmal, and Tulam. So this was the mystery. Who built these lost cities? Was it the ancient Egyptians? Was it people from much earlier escaping the sinking Atlantis? Surely it couldn't have been the natives. And how did this mysterious enigmatic writing work? What did the mysterious glyphs mean? How were they represented? Were they whole words, as in Chinese shu, or as in cuneiform amagi, or ancient Egyptian bik? Or were they syllables, as in Chinese hansu, which means Chinese characters, and it is actually the word where the modern Japanese word kanji comes from? Or were they sounds, as in our alphabet k, a, t, cat? Or were they possibly a combination of all three? The hieroglyphs were to remain a mystery for a long time. They could not even be read by descendants of the Maya. Delander had done his job well. Ironically, it was his attempt to destroy Maya culture by researching it that would be the first breakthrough, and this is a picture of one of the pages of his journal. Delander's research into the Mayan language, although it was riddled with mistakes, contained a valuable record. Maya numbers would be decoded first, and this permitted understanding of parts of texts relating to astronomy and the Mayan calendar in the 19th and early 20th centuries. It was quickly recognized that the Mesoamericans used a base 20 counting system, obviously based on using fingers and toes for counting. And an unusually advanced concept was the use of zero, very rare in all but the most advanced mathematical societies. Here we see the numbers with 0 depicted by a shell, then individual dots to 4 with a bar representing 5. From there on, it's a matter of adding dots to bars up to 19. Higher numerals were written in a series, each of which multiplied the next. We write this today as a number separated by multiplication dots, as we see in the example. Tablets and documents were written in 2 columns, read usually left to right, then down, as in the pattern at right. But further progress could not be made until the 1950s, because the first one who made it, Yuri Knozerov, was behind the Iron Curtain, and his work was dismissed for a long time by the established experts. In 1959, an Americanized Russian, Tatyana Proskuryakov, realized the dates she was looking at on a stone inscription all referred to life events of the rulers. From then on, rapid progress was made in a number of breakthroughs in the 60s and 70s, with sudden inspirations, insights, often leading to remarkable leaps forward. Today, most Maya texts can be read and understood reasonably well. Here is a picture of one of only 4 codices or books which survived Delander's fires in the 1560s. This is a page from the Dresden Codex, so named because it is now held in the Dresden State Library. The Dresden Codex's focus is particularly on eclipse and Venus tables. Since the Romantic movement's travellers had visited Maya territory in the 1800s, an image had arisen that the Maya were a race of philosopher-astronomers. They were seen as the educated and refined Greeks of Mesoamerica and compared unfavourably to the obviously more barbaric Aztecs, who represented the bloodthirsty and less cultivated Romans. Some very powerful figures in the academic establishment actually held back progress by an unthinking attachment to these ideas. And this was a way of thinking, by some, which lasted as late as the late 1980s. But new advances in reading the script made it increasingly clear that the Maya were absolutely part of their region and its traditions, including the less savoury ones. What had previously not made a lot of sense in many Maya texts now suddenly fell into place. So finally, a realistic picture of the Maya emerged. They built a series of city-states on a grand scale, with elaborate public ceremonial structures. They had a highly advanced mathematical and astronomical knowledge, and a series of highly sophisticated and interlocking calendars, as well as the most advanced writing system in Mesoamerica. But they were just as prone to war as any of their neighbours. In fact, they exulted in it and planned it according to the cycles of Venus. And the cult of bloodletting and human sacrifice, which was part of other Mesoamerican societies, was just as much part of their society. The Aztecs were not the black sheep of the family after all, with the Maya the goody two-shoes. The whole family was tarred with the same brush. Maya cosmology consisted of the earth, the sky, and the underworld. Strangely enough, for an astronomically advanced race, they thought the earth was flat and sandwiched in between the other two layers. The earth, sometimes seen as a square and sometimes as a cornfield, had 4 cardinal points. The sky had 13 layers, the magical divine number of the Maya, and the underworld had 9 layers. Connecting all of these layers through the centre was the sacred tree. Many of you who are older will recognise this illustration. Back in the 1970s, German author Erich von Däniken tried to convince us in his book Chariots of the Gods that this was not a Maya god but an alien astronaut at the controls of his rocket ship. In fact, this tablet, which is actually the lid of the sarcophagus of the Maya lord Pakal the Great, should be looked at in this orientation, which is how you would see it in entering his tomb. The Tree of Life connected all the layers of the world's centre in the form of one person, the king, who would commune with all these layers. So in the picture we see Pakal at the right, at the earth plane, positioned in the sacrificial pose and looking up at the heavens. Below him is the underworld, and above him is the trunk of the sacred tree, pointing directly at the point where all the Maya's religious attention was focused, the centre of our galaxy, the Milky Way, and in particular the place where the path of the sun, the ecliptic, crosses the line at the centre of the galaxy. Present-day folk traditions, such as the Danza de los Voladores, undoubtedly stem back to classical Maya observances. Note the 4 corners of the earth platform, with the tree trunk in the centre, and 4 dancers or flyers representing the 4 directions, who each hang and swing around the platform, doing 13 revolutions in total. Incidentally, the Pakal sarcophagus lid proved to be another instrumental piece of the puzzle that would finally enable the Maya texts to be read. For the Maya, time was at the center of their being and pervaded every aspect of their lives. Days were representations of gods, each with their personal characteristics. Priests could divine the energies of a particular day or course of action. Prediction was possible because time was not considered linear, but cyclic, and it therefore repeated. This concept is not unfamiliar to some of us in the West. It was known in ancient Egypt, to medieval people with the idea of the Wheel of Fortune, and to Western astrologers. The most important difference was that time was not defined in years, but in multiple cycles of days. So what were these cycles? The day was known as the kin, and 20 kin made up a winal. 18 cycles of winal made up a tun of 360 days, and thus I hope you will forgive my poor pun in the title of the page. 20 tun made up a kartun of 7,200 days, or 19.7 years. A buktun was 144,000 days, or 20 kartun, or 394 years. The piktun, which is a reconstructed word, so we're not really sure what the real word for this number was, consisted of 1,872,000 days, or 13 buktun, or 5,125 years. This last one we'll return to later. By the way, there is also a school of thought that the piktun was not 13 buktun, but 20, in which case it would be 2,880,000 days, or 7,885 years. We'll come back to this too later. When we talk about the Mayan calendar, we're actually talking about something that doesn't exist. There is no Mayan calendar as such. It was actually several calendars, all working at different paces for different purposes. The sacred calendar was the Tzolkin of 260 days. The secular calendar, or harp, of 360 days corresponded to the solar year, with the addition of 5 extra days called the Uayib. The Tunban Kark of 52 years is known to us today as the calendar round. And then the long count calendar is 5,125 years, and this was the measure used by the classical Maya. But for the late Maya and the Aztecs, this count was too long, so they adopted another count of 256 years, known as the short count. All clear now? Well, if you're confused, that's exactly where a lot of the dispute about this whole Mayan calendar end of the world date comes from. In addition to these calendars, there were also other cycles, known as the Venus count of 584 days, the moon cycle, the Lords of the Night of 9 days, and distance measures, which I'll also go into later. How did all these fit together? Imagine a series of cogwheels of different sizes, all interlocking within and around each other, and you have an idea how they worked in unison. The Tzolkin was a magical combination of 260 unique days, each with the combined characteristics of the day god and number which made it up. They were given names combining the name of the god and a number between 1 and 13. For example, for Ahau was the day of the god Ahau in its 4th cycle. 13 was a magical number for the Maya. All the universe was considered divisible by it. The Maya day had 13 hours, and there were also 13 months in the Tzolk'in. It is also no coincidence that the 260 days of the Tzolk'in also roughly corresponded to the human gestational cycle, to also the time from planting to harvest, and in some places to the cycles of the sun. As we've heard, the harp was the secular cycle, and it was divided into 18 months of 20 days. Tacked on to the end of the harp were 5 extra days of the Uayib, which were considered unlucky. People spent those days inside purifying themselves. It was dangerous to venture outside, as the portals between the earth and the underworld were open during the Uayib. The harp was similar in length to the tun, but was not the same. The calendar round represented to the Maya largely what a century represents to us, perhaps the longest lifespan. The 18,980 days of the Tunbin contained exactly 73 Tzolk'in and 52 harp. It reconciled both harp and Tzolk'in, and in an important lesson for the end of the world is, at the end of a cycle, the calendar simply reset and started again, like a digital counter or speedometer. The long count was the longest traditional count and measured grand cycles. The Maya determined that the current cycle's start date was at the end of the previous one at the turnover point of 13 pictuns, and that this day had been a 4-ahau day. If we translate this into our Gregorian calendar, we get a start date for this great age or sun of 11th of August 3114 BC. When the long count again reaches 13 pictuns, the counter either simply resets or the world ends, depending on your point of view. That reset date is also a 4-ahau day, and the most widely accepted date for this is 21st of December 2012. However, this is disputed. This stele from Quirigua depicts the creation date of the last great age, and it's a good chance for you to see if you can now read your Maya numbers. Remember, you have to go left to right, then down and back, and remember your dots are singles and your bars equal 5. So here is the date. 13 Baktun, 0 Kartun, 0 Uenal, sorry, that's 0 Tun, 0 Uenal, 0 Kin, 4-ahau, and 8 Kumku. As we've heard, there is not universal acceptance of the correct calculation today of these long count dates. We have variations ranging from 1492 through 1752 to 2532. And if there are in fact 20 Baktun in a pictun rather than 13, then the end date would not turn over until 4772 AD. One of the reasons for the confusion is that the various texts from various cultures and cities and traditions that all separately gave rise to this date, and they were all using different dating systems, often hundreds of years apart or more. And with the long count 20 times longer than the short count, the difference and potential for error and confusion is dramatic. And then we have other time measures too, such as the Venus cycle, the lords of the night, which made it a bit like the days of the week. Are you a Saturday person? And the moon cycle, which was usually a 6-month cycle, but you could possibly, by reading the wrong glyph, make an 18-month mistake. Or reading a glyph wrongly, that is, too. And then we have distance numbers, which describe a date in terms of how long before or after it is from another date. At first this seems strange to us, but we've all heard a variation of this. We will recognise from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. 77 years ago, referred to the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776 from the perspective of the Civil War in 1863, and it's an example of a modern-day distance number. The calendars were used in combination to put events in both a historical context, but also, perhaps more importantly for the Maya, a cosmic perspective. They were used to record building dedications, to regulate festivals, and to divine the future. Sometimes the Maya was so fanatical about exact placing of dates in all their contexts that every one of the dating methods we've seen before were used together on the one inscription. The extension into astrology was not a great leap. Here are the Maya day names, and as we've heard, each of the gods represented had their special characteristics. The numbers added more subtleties, as did your place in the 260-day matrix of the Tzolk'in. Your position within the Tunbin-Kaak cycle also showed your generational tendencies. The 9 Night Lords might indicate hidden tendencies, and Venus added its own variations. So we've now covered the essentials of Maya and Mesoamerican history, the mysteries of their writing in numbers, and the complexities of their many calendars. By now, you have enough background knowledge about the Maya to move on to the modern debate about the Mayan calendar and the 2012 end date. If you've enjoyed this presentation on the historical background to the Mayan calendar and would like to follow it up with 2012 controversy, just follow the URL on the description below. Once again, video 2 deals with the idea of the great ages or suns, which give rise to the idea that the end of this one is almost upon us. Then we look at whether there are any credible Maya prophecies, as opposed to the fevered imaginings of our 2012 prophets of doom. We look at the history of predicted apocalypses for something supposed to wipe us out completely that has been forecast so many times in the past. It certainly hasn't happened so far. We look at the major personalities of the 2012 craze, and what they and others have claimed is going to happen. Then we see what scientists, what Nostradamus, and what modern-day astrologers have to say about this. And finally, before we come to the end, perhaps literally, we hear what the modern-day Maya have to say. I hope you enjoyed this and learned something. If you did, I can assure you that video 2 will be even more informative.